Following the end of 2007, the game had just seen a couple of card releases that shook up the metagame significantly. Light and Darkness Dragon was released near the end of the year, already seeing mainstream success thanks to the last SJC of 2007 in San Mateo, slotting itself into Perfect Circle Monarchs like a glove, and a new face on the block, Dimensional Prison, had been released just after, waiting for its chance to prove itself in the upcoming metagame. The environment which these two occupied would be mostly static for the first month as we received the first set of the year, which judging from its contents was not poised to make nearly the impact desired. Duelist Packs Jaden Yuki 3 and Jesse Anderson. Release date January 26, 2008. Set type Duelist Packs. Major strategies Evil Hero, Crystal Beasts. Impact problem cards in later eras. Jaden 3 and Jesse did practically nothing on release that would shake up the metagame, but they did include a couple of cards that would make waves as the game progressed forward into later eras. From Jaden 3, the primary focus was on the Evil Heroes released in the latter half of 2007, with a couple of new cards to boost the strategy like Infernal Prodigy, who could be special summoned if you controlled no monsters, being considerable as tribute fodder for some decks, and Dark Calling, a Miracle Fusion-like spell that banished materials from the hand or grave for Evil Heroes, treating the fusion as if it was done by Dark Fusion, seeing usage as an OTK enabler for Dark Gaia OTK decks that had occasionally popped up. For Jesse Anderson, the cards here would be more generically focused, like Hand Destruction and Grave Squirmer, seeing some experimentation at the time but no widespread play. However, it did also release two cards that would become an issue far later down the road, with Phantom Skyblaster and Grinder Golem, two monsters that could generate tokens in very different ways. Grinder Golem would see some experimentation at this point in time with the card Remove Brainwashing from Magician's Force, but mostly these two would be forgotten until around 2017 when a new era would bring them both back into the spotlight. SJC Orlando would take place the same day as these pack releases, and was extremely notable as the first true testing grounds for the recently released Dimensional Prison. While Perfect Circle Monarch would take the majority of top spots, Gadget had a particularly impressive showing here with the new Battle Trap in tow. Cedric Sequeira would win the day with Perfect Circle here, showcasing Light and Darkness Dragon with 2 copies in his main board. This would also be what is considered the end of Perfect Circle format, and rather abruptly too, as while the format was starting to show its true potential, the next core set would release 2 weeks later, and it would, without exaggeration, change everything about the game moving forward. Phantom Darkness. Release date February 13th, 2008. Set type Core Set. Major strategies Dark, Gemini, Gladiator Beast. Impact the beginning of the second Tier 0 format. Phantom Darkness was undoubtedly the most impactful set to the game released within the GX era, on par with Cybernetic Revolution. And it was because with its release came a monster so unbelievably powerful that it would warp the metagame around it for almost the remainder of the year. The monster in question was Dark Armed Dragon, a boss that could only be special summoned if you had exactly 3 darks in grave and could banish a dark from grave to pop a card on field as many times as it wanted in a turn. Just as a reminder, at this point in time priority was still in effect, meaning that the moment Dark Armed came down, it was popping something, even if the opponent had a removal option. This card released alongside a series of cards specifically designed to promote a dark monster strategy with graveyard dumping tools and swarming, such as Armageddon Knight, who dumped the dark from deck on summon, Dark Horus, Creator, and Nephtes, who all had similar summoning conditions to Dark Armed Dragon, just a little less effective presence or too high investment summon, and Dark Grepher and Allure of Darkness, which were both brand new TCG exclusives on release, providing additional grave filling and card draw to the deck that benefited the strategy greatly. Dark Armed Dragon decks, or DAD decks for short, would rapidly take over the meta following this release, which we'll see with the next SJC. While DAD did take the spotlight here almost immediately, there were still other releases in the set worth talking about as it applied to the game as a whole. Yubel was a new series of monsters and the cover monster of the set, able to cycle up their bosses if a previous version is destroyed by a card effect, with all unable to be destroyed by battle, all destroying anything that attacked them, burning the opponent for the monster's attack, Terror Incarnate destroying all monsters on the field except itself at the end phase of your turn, and Ultimate Nightmare able to apply the destroy and burn effects even if it's the one that's doing the attacking. Yubel and her brood would see absolutely no play at this point in time, but a notable point for them was also that Yubel's floating condition could be triggered by popping her while she's still in the hand, which would be notable if a card ever could do that specifically. Cyber Valley was a new monster that could banish itself in various situations to net the controller draws or recursion, able to banish itself when attacked to draw 1 and end the battle phase, banish itself and another monster on your field to draw 2, or banish itself and a card from your hand to stack a card in grave on top of the deck. Out of all of these effects, one probably stood out the moment I mentioned it, and yes, that's why it was played. Cyber Valley not only stalled an entire battle phase on its own, warranting a monster removal prior to the battle phase, but also replaced itself with a card draw, similarly to how Card Trooper did before. Gemini received a few new pieces here with Gemini Lancer, Future Samurai, and the one worth mentioning, Gigaplant, with an effect similar to Illbloods, letting you revive plants and insects from the grave, which was particularly useful for Gemini strategies as that meant you could revive Blazewing Butterfly or the new TCG exclusive Lonefire Blossom, who could tribute off a plant once per turn, including itself, to summon any plant from deck, which could be another Gigaplant. Gladiator Beast would receive a couple of new pieces in Darius, who revives a Gladiator Beast in grave on his tagout summon, and Proving Grounds, a search spell for Gladiator Beast monsters, which would give the deck a little more power, enabling easier access to Heraklinos. Super Ancient Deep Sea King Sekelacanth would see some experimentation at the time with various fish strategies, but see no success in the short term. However, it would become relevant fairly soon after this with an FTK deck in the near future. Super Polymerization let you fusion summon using monsters from either field without the opponent getting to respond, being referred to as Spell Speed 4 in the community, which at this point was way ahead of its time. Fusion materials at this stage were still mostly rigid with very few generic fusions in the current pool, so it wouldn't see play at this time, but would rise in popularity as more and more generic fusions became available. Lastly, Zombie would see a significant release here with Goblin Zombie, an OCG import card that had actually been in the OCG for 5 years prior to this release, being a promo from a Reshef of Destruction game guide in 2003. Goblin Zombie milled the opponent for 1 when it dealt battle damage, and searched a zombie from deck with 1200 or less defense when sent to grave, being mandatory and couldn't miss timing, being among some of the only searchers of its kind, alongside Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest. SJC Houston would be the first testing grounds of this release, taking place 10 days later on February 23rd, and the new dominant threat of Dad was apparent. 9 of the top 16 went to the newly created Dad Return strategies, which aimed to abuse Dad's Banish Pop effect with Return from the Different Dimension, Escape from the Dark Dimension, and Dimension Fusion to quickly swarm and control a board to end the game. In addition to Dad Return strategies, Explosion OTK would see a significant boost in popularity here thanks to Cyber Valley, who provided either stalling with its battle phase ending effect or draw power with his banishing effect, making the spell grinding that much more effective. However, neither one of these strategies would take the event. Jonathan Moore, or more commonly known as House of Champs to the community, would win the event with 6 Samurai, being a surprising run for the deck to have in the newly oppressive metagame. This would be followed by a ban list update on March 1st, aimed at balancing the meta from the previous few months, but seeing as how Phantom Darkness had just released, it most likely wouldn't be hitting Dad at all. Newly banned were Breaker the Magical Warrior and Magician of Faith, who seemed to be consistently moving on and off the ban list, and Call of the Haunted, aimed specifically at the zombie decks of late 2007 abusing it with Card of Safe Return. Newly limited were Ryza as a hit to Monarch strategies, Advanced Ritual Art as a hit to the Demise OTK, Monster Reborn, returning from 0, Nobleman of Crossout, down from 2 as a generic staple hit, and Ojama Trio as a nerf to Baboon Burn strategies. Newly semi'd were Cyber Dragon as a machine and a generic nerf, Lightened Darkness Dragon as a nerf to Perfect Circle, Necroface in response to a potential mill deck with the new Phantom Darkness cards, Foolish Burial as it was synergistic with the new Dark cards, and Book of Moon, Mage Power, and Magical Stone Excavation, all up from 1. Lastly, released from the list here were Apprentice Magician, Green, Yellow, and Red gadgets, Jinzo, Creature Swap, Pot of Avarice, and Reckless Greed, all up from 2. SJC Costa Mesa would follow directly after this list a week later on March 8th, and with it, we'd see the absolute dominance of Dad Return on the meta now that its primary competition of Perfect Circle had been nerfed so significantly. 21 of the top 32 at this event were Dad Return, cementing it as an absolute menace on the format with no other deck even coming close to dethroning it, with Lazaro Bolido taking the event with it, claiming the first copy of the new SJC prize card Doom Caliber Knight along with it, which itself was a powerful threat in a deck like Dad Return. There was also a new Duelist Pack Collection tin released between Costa Mesa and Columbus, but the only card of note it brought was Card Ejector, which was so significantly too slow for the meta that it was almost instantly forgotten. SJC Columbus took place just 3 weeks after Costa Mesa on March 29th, and we'd see similar results with Dad Return taking 13 of the top 16 for this event. There was a single new deck that did pop up from this event, being Spell Economics FTK, which aimed to use Spell Economics in combination with Dark Magician of Chaos to cycle Dimension Fusion indefinitely, powering some tribute to burn monsters to clean up the game like Toon Cannon Soldier or Shadow Priestess of Ohm, who would tribute DMOC constantly to put it back out of play, revive it with Dimension Fusion, return Fusion to hand, and repeat. Jerry Wang would win the event with Dad Return, incorporating the Cyber Valley engine into the deck with machine duplication to provide significant drawing power. If it seemed like Dad decks were already overpowered in the meta, it was about to get significantly worse, as the next structure deck released 3 days later would spike its power up yet again. The Dark Emperor. Release date April 2nd, 2008. Set type Structure Deck. Major strategies Macro. Impact The Rich Get Richer. The Dark Emperor structure deck was the 12th TCG structure deck, and it seemed to be learning from all of the mistakes of the previous structure decks by releasing some of the highest concentrations of both good new cards for use in the meta, as well as reprints for big cards of the time. In terms of new cards, Caius the Shadow Monarch would give Ryza some actual competition for the title of Best Monarch, banishing 1 card on field on Tribute Summon, then burning the opponent for 1,000 if you banished a Dark Monster. Matching the new Macro End boss, the deck also brought Dimensional Alchemist, which banished the top card of your deck once per turn to gain 500 attack that turn, returning a banished monster to hand when destroyed, and DDR, Different Dimension Reincarnation, which acted like premature burial for banished monsters, taking a discard instead of life points. These 3 cards would all see usage following this release, with DDR finding its way into Dad Return decks immediately, while Caius and Alchemist would take a little time to find their place in the metagame. Although once it was figured out, Caius would move from here to be one of the most important staple pieces of the metagame. As for reprints, this set pulled no punches, reprinting Kaiku, Bazoo, Exiled Force, Banisher of the Radiance, DD Warrior, Warrior Lady, Scout Plane, Survivor, Master, and Assailant, MST, Knock, Soul Release, Rhoda, Econ, Vortex, Braincon, D-Fissure, Return, Torrential, Bottomless, Karma Cut, and Macro, making this one of the most concentrated bursts of good reprints ever up until this point. And the reprint train wouldn't stop here, as on the same day, the first in a popular long line of reprint sets would also be released, showcasing some of Yu-Gi-Oh's best and worst reprint practices in one place. Gold Series. Release date April 2nd, 2008. Set type Reprint Set. Major strategies Staples of the meta for the last few years. Impact Tendencies on full display. The first ever Gold Series was released in April of 2008, and with it would come a staple of Yu-Gi-Oh! For the foreseeable future: regular reprint sets. After a meta card has been available for usually around a year, it will be made available for reprint sometime in the near future alongside other meta viable cards in a condensed reprint set, which can include reprints of cards from many years prior if they've popped up in meta viability recently. Gold Series was the first set to truly do this to the extent we know today, bringing reprints of popular meta cards like Jinzo, Don Zalug, Breaker the Magical Warrior, DD Warrior Lady, DMOC, Cyber Dragon, Silva and Gold, Doomdozer, Grandmaster of the Six Samurai, Chimeratech Overdragon, Heavy Storm, Rhoda, Braincon, Mirror Force, Torrential, Rivalry of Warlords, Skill Drain, and probably the most substantial reprint of all, Crush Card Virus, being its first reprint since its stint as the SJC prize card of early 2007. However, there's a catch with this particular reprint, being the first real instance of short printing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Crush Card Virus was so heavily short printed in this run of Gold Series that it was rumored to only be in 1 out of every 5 cases of Gold Series, which was unquestionably one of, if not the absolute worst, cases of short printing in the entire history of the game. This was not made clear prior to the set's release, and almost overnight the card once again shot up into the hundreds for a single copy, which was made even worse by the fact that the undeniably best deck in the format played the card as a staple piece of the deck. SJC Minneapolis would be held a little over a week later on April 12th, and once again Dad Returned would be the most dominant in the tournament, with many builds now opting for the newly released DDR as an extension piece. We would also see the return of zombies in the meta with a 4th place finish, using Solemn Judgment at its full 3 copies as a way to count out the dads in the format, as negating the summon would prevent a priority pop and put their dark count in grave at 4. This wasn't the only deck to make a surprise appearance, with 1st place going to Paul Leviton on Gladiator Beast, giving him his 2nd SJC win, similarly playing Triple Judgment in addition to Triple Shadow Imprisoning Mirror in the main deck to counter out Dad. Even with other decks finally finding a footing into the meta, it was clear that Dad Return was far overtuned, and on May 9th, an emergency ban list would go into effect to attempt to quell the menace. Dimension Fusion was banned, Return from the Different Dimension was limited, and Allure of Darkness was semi-limited here. All hits concentrated on bringing Dad's presence in the meta back down by a substantial amount. And there was no clearer picture of the results from this than SJC Nashville the next day on May 10th, where Dad Returned would claim a staggering 14 spots in the top 16, showing that the nerfs were effectively useless to the deck's performance, taking all 8 spots in the top 8. The 2 Monarch strategies are worth noting here, however, as both had swapped to using Caius as their primary Monarch of choice, with Gravekeeper Monarch being exceptionally interesting as its field spell Necro Valley prevented a good portion of what Dad decks aimed to accomplish. Jason Holloway would win the day on Dad Return, showcasing how the deck had adapted to the ban list, adding in copies of Escape from the Dark Dimension to offset the lack of fusion and returns, in addition to pivoting to a more Perfect Circle core, to offset the losses in the Dad core. Relief would soon arrive for the format from this period, as the next set would aim to balance out the overwhelming presence of dark decks in the format with the introduction of a few light ones to counter them out. Light of Destruction. Release date, May 13th, 2008. Set type, Core Set. Major strategies, Lightsworn, Arcana Force, Battery Man. Impact, balancing out the format. Light of Destruction was the 2nd core set of 2008, and it would bring waves of new archetypes and support for older ones that would effectively balance out the Dad Return meta landscape, with most support waves being focused on light monsters, similarly to how Phantom Darkness focused on darks, with even a couple of generic light pieces like Guardian of Order, a TCG exclusive that could special summon itself if you controlled 2 or more light monsters, and Honest, who could be discarded from your hand during the damage step to have your monster gain the attack of the monster it was battling, giving all light decks a generic battle trick that would win you any combat. Its headliner archetype was Lightsworn, a series of light monsters that had powerful effects on the condition of sending cards from the top of the deck to the graveyard at some point, usually at the end of the turn, an effect which we will be referring to as its community term of milling from now on. These members included Jane, who boosted to 2100 when attacking and milled 2 in the end phase, Lila, who could move itself to defense mode to pop a spell or trap and milled 3 in the end phase, Garoth, who milled 2 anytime a Lightsworn monster milled, drawing 1 for each Lightsworn monster milled by this effect, Lumina, who could discard a card to revive a Lightsworn monster, milling 3 in the end phase, Raikou, who popped a card on flip effect, milling 3 when it did, Wolf, who special summoned itself if milled, unable to be summoned normally, Celestia, who milled 4 on Tribute Summon to destroy 2 cards the opponent controlled, Kragoneth, who gained 300 attack and defense for every different Lightsworn name in the grave and dealt piercing damage, milling 3 in the end phase, and the payoff card for the entire archetype, Judgment Dragon, who could be special summoned from the hand if you had at least 4 differently named Lightsworn monsters in grave, could pay 1000 life points to nuke the board, and milled 4 in the end phase. Judgment Dragon itself was such a powerhouse thanks to the priority rule, able to hit the board and nuke it before the opponent got a chance to respond, and fulfilling its summoning condition was extremely simple thanks to the milling effect of all the Lightsworn cards. In addition to this baseline, they also received Solar Recharge, which sent a Lightsworn from hand to grave to draw 2 and mill 2, and the TCG exclusive monsters Arcus, who gave your Lightsworns targeting protection and milled 2 in the end phase, and Erin, who shuffled any defense monster she attacked into the deck and milled 3 in the end phase. Lightsworn would move from here to be a major player in the space mostly thanks to the raw power of Judgment Dragon, but would suffer many of the same weaknesses as Dad Return due to their bosses having similar summoning mechanics, causing it to occasionally get caught in the crossfire. Arcana Force would be the other new archetype introduced here, being a series of monsters whose effects are either beneficial or detrimental to the user based on the results of a coin flip on summon, with practically all of them being subpar for the current metagame, although Zero the Fool would see some play purely due to it being a settable wall similar to Marshmallow, who was limited at the time. Battery Man would receive a significant wave of support here for an archetype that saw very little put into it to begin with, giving them Charger, who summoned a Battery Man from deck on Tribute Summon, Microcell, who special summoned a lower level Battery Man from deck on flip, then drew a card when destroyed after, and Industrial Strength, who could special summon itself by banishing 2 Battery Men in grave and could banish a Thunder Engrave to pop a monster and spell or trap on field. The support would put some eyes on Battery Man as a strategy, but there were still too few power cards to make the deck work at the time. On the other side of the pond, you had Frogs, who received 2 new support pieces in Unifrog, who could attack directly and, if you controlled another frog when you did, destroy a spell or trap on field, and Substitoad, who could tribute a monster on field to summon a frog from the deck. Substitoad was seen as incredibly useful out the gate thanks to its ability to turbo out a Treeborn frog from the deck, but it failed to make a splash in the meta at the time due to the lack of a proper payoff for loading the grave with frogs at the time, outside of Monarch related strategies, which were already weaker in the current state of the game. Jinzo Returner was an interesting piece of support aimed at retraining the previous Jinzo number 7 into a monster that properly supported the titular monster who didn't exist at number 7's release, able to attack directly and summon Jinzo from the grave when it was sent to grave, destroying the summoned Jinzo at the end phase, but was primarily intended to help summon Jinzo Lord, who could only be special summoned by tributing a Jinzo on field, had the same trap negate effect, and could destroy all face-up traps to burn the opponent for each. While Lord saw effectively no play, Returner would find an interesting home in the coming months that we'll talk about soon. Volcanic Queen was a weaker version of Lava Golem in many ways, only taking 1 tribute to summon and giving the choice of either a tribute or a burn, but it also allowed the opponent to burn back with its effect, making it noteworthy but not too useful for the time. Golden Ladybug could be revealed in hand every turn to gain 500 life points, which would be seen from time to time in stall strategy side decks, specifically those centered around Final Countdown in later years thanks to its ability to win in time. Phantom Dragon was seen as a sort of counter to the special summon heavy decks, allowing you to summon it on the opponent's turn at the cost of 2 of your own monster card zones in addition to the one it copied, seeing occasional side deck play. Golden Bamboo Sword was an interesting payoff to the previously released Broken Bamboo Sword, letting the controller draw 2, which would see experimentation in FTK decks. Limit Reverse was effectively called the Haunted for weaker monsters, seeing experimentation in some strategies. Summon Limit was a continuous trap that limited both players to a total of 2 summons in a turn, which would see heavy amounts of side deck play over the years. Fossil Dyna Pachycephalo was an OCG import that, when flipped, destroyed all special summoned monsters on the field and prevented special summoning while on the field, being incredibly powerful for stun strategies. Lastly, and without question most importantly, Gladiator Beast Gazaris was a contact fusion of Bestiari and any other Gladiator Beast monster, popped 2 cards when summoned, and could tag out for 2 Gladiator Beasts instead of just 1. This singular card would completely shift the entire fundamental core of Gladiator Beasts as a whole, as now any 2 Gladiator Beasts could make Gazaris through a combination of tagging out and chaining effects, which would greatly swing a game into your favor. With this release, Gladiator Beasts would see a significant shift in their meta presence over the coming months and moving into the national season, starting with SJC St. Louis on May 24th, where Gladiator Beasts would take 6 of the top 16 spots, finally pushing Dad Return off the pedestal it had held since Phantom Darkness. This primary shift, as we can see in Stephen Harris's first place list from this event, was the inclusion of Elemental Hero Prisma, who had an extremely unique feature for Gladiator Beast decks by being able to reveal Gazaris in the extra deck to mill a Bestiari from deck and copy its name, allowing Prisma to be contact fused with any other Gladiator Beast into Gazaris, or to use Test Tiger on it, tagging it out for Darius, who could then revive the Bestiari milled to contact fuse that way. This particular interaction became so integral to the core of Gladiator Beasts over the coming months as the deck would rapidly rise into the top deck of the format, making this period known in the community as Gladiator format due to the deck's absolute dominance. As for other newer faces in the format, Machine OTK received an interesting facelift by integrating the Phantom Darkness Dark support pieces with Jinzo and Returner, who could be dumped from the deck to revive a Jinzo sitting in grave, allowing the user to stun any form of responses the opponent might have to a sudden Dark Arm Dragon push. While this deck was Machine OTK, it effectively mixed the Dad package into the previous Machine package, making it a new beast entirely. Ocean Control, though it had popped up a few times prior to this, would make another appearance here, being primarily focused around looping various hero monsters using Hero City and Ocean, with plenty of text from the meta sprinkled in like Shadow Imprisoning Mirror and Solemn Judgment. Lightsworn would see its first top here, interestingly including 3 Card of Safe Return, which could trigger off your Wolf and Luminous summons as an easy way to draw for Judgment Dragon. It also included Necrogardna, who was a great mill off the Lightsworn effects and could double as a Crush Card Virus target. Lastly, Counter Fairy made another appearance here, taking advantage of the various counter traps legal at the time like Dark Bribe, Divine Wrath, Magic Drain, and Solemn Judgment, alongside Bountiful Artemis and Harvest Angel of Wisdom to benefit from them or loop them, providing powerful control. US Nationals would follow a month later on June 21st, and we'd see similar results to St. Louis, with Gladiator Beast being the deck to beat in the format. However, a large deviation from the usual Dad return structure was made here in the creation of Dad Turbo, a deck entirely focused on turboing through your deck as fast as possible to generate advantage and to summon out Dad to end the game, foregoing the usual return inclusion for more draw power. This was primarily thanks to the Destiny Hero package that had already been staple in Dad return up until this point, with one deck list here going so far as to include Limit Reverse as a way to continuously summon back Disc Commander for his draw 2 effect. Chris Bowling would win the event with Gladiator Beast, seeing very little change in the deck structure since St. Louis. The European Championships were held the same day, and similarly, the top 8 breakdown showed a serious favor for both Gladiator Beast and Dad decks, both return and turbo variants. Vasilis Bulbasakos would win the event with Gladiator Beast 2, with a couple of extremely noteworthy additions to his list. The first was Soul Taker, which was an additional piece of monster removal to get the ball rolling and to force targets like Cyber Valley to be unable to resolve their effects. The second, and far more impactful for the long term of the game, was the inclusion of Raikou. Gladiator Beast specifically at this stage had a bit of a mind game going with this angle, as most players would assume Gladiator Beast leaving a set monster on the board would be Haplomus, who you wouldn't want to attack and give the opponent a free tag out. By including Raikou here, Vasilis could usually get it to the next turn, where they could flip it and choose their target then, breaking a more established board rather than taking the pickings when attacked into. This inclusion of Raikou would slowly become more and more staple in the format as a generic removal tool that just happened to also mill you, proving to be a great asset for many decks. Canadian Nationals would follow a week later on June 28th, and we'd once again see Gladiator Beast as a top threat, with Lazaro Bolito taking first place for the second time this year, this time on Gladiator Beast, who opted to tech one Wabuku to guarantee combat survival for his beasts. Last for this block, SJC Philly would take place a week later on July 5th, and we'd once again see similar results from Gladiator Beast, but with a little more variety outside of their chunk of the top cut. For starters, Soul Control had picked up significant popularity here, using Royal Oppression to counter out the Gladiator Beast summons, and Prime Material Dragon as a way to counter out Gazaris, still using Monarch powerhouses like Caius, Ryza, and Thessalos to boot. The other was the first meta appearance of Lightsworn Monarch, seeing a single top spot, mixing the engine of Soul Control with Lightsworn to enable powerful tribute plays while setting up Judgment Dragon or Celestia pushes. Michael Kohanem would win the event with Gladiator Beast, being the 5th event in a row won by the new meta powerhouse, seeing little to no difference in his variant from the other winning lists. The national season would end with this event, followed by a pack that many were not necessarily the most excited for, but was definitely a welcome inclusion for a couple of specific reprints. Retro Pack. Release date, July 8th, 2008. Set type, reprint set. Major strategies, DM era staples. Impact, seemingly out of nowhere reprints. So Retro Pack was an extremely weird pack, even in its own time. This pack, being the first ever European exclusive pack, was intended to bring a few cards that had only been released as promos in the US to the European market for the first time, like Blastsphere, Copycat, and Relieve Monster, all of which were Shonen Jump promos in the US but never released in the EU. It also brought reprints of many DM-era staples like Raigeki, Graceful Charity, and Painful Choice, but the issue lies in the fact that many of these cards had already been banned for some time at this point, making their reprints questionable. SJC Honolulu would take place just 4 days later on July 12th, and, surprise surprise, the meta hadn't really shifted from the national season, seeing a slight shift in the popularity of Soul Control and the inclusion of Fossil Dyna into some lists, but aside from that, very minor. Mario Matthew would take the event with Gladiator Beast, playing 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance as a way to stun dad decks for a turn while he set up Gyzarus lines. SJC Toronto took place 2 weeks later on July 26th, and this would be without question one of the best events for Gladiator Beasts, seeing them take a whopping 12 of the top 16, seeing Lazaro Bolito take his 3rd major event victory of the year with Gladiator Beast once again, being a similar list to his previous Canadian Nationals win. The only other thing to talk about with this particular event was the single top from a fairly new deck in Phantom Turbo, which aimed to load the grave with powerful Dark Monster bosses, then copy their effects with Phantom of Chaos, including cards like Destiny Hero Plasma, Dark Armed Dragon, and the Dark Creator. Although the meta had effectively sat still for the past few months, changes were coming, and whether they could be considered good or bad would entirely depend on who you asked. Premium Pack 2. Release date, July 31st, 2008. Set type, OCG Import Set. Major strategies, Elemental Hero, Zombies, Fairy. Impact, mostly bulk, 1 sleeper powerhouse. Premium Pack 2, similar to the first, was an OCG import set almost entirely focused on bringing over the OCG imports we had not yet received, with a focus placed on the pieces from the GX manga. For those who are unaware, the GX manga is actually extremely different from the anime following the same characters, as rather than being a rotating threat each season, it's entirely focused on a single central antagonist searching for the Planet series monsters. Many of the rather odd legacy support pieces you probably know from the TCG alongside some other out-of-place bosses came from this side series, which I'll have to cover another day as it's extremely interesting, but for now we did receive a few new cards. For Elemental Heroes, we received Woodsman, Nosp, Heat, Lady Heat, Terra Firma, Inferno, and Voltic, all of which are used by Jaden in the manga, and all of which saw little to no success on release, with the only one seeing experimentation being Voltic as a way to recur your pieces banished for Miracle Fusion in later formats. Fairy strategies would receive Mackenzie's cards Athena, who burn the opponent anytime a fairy is summoned, and could cycle a fairy on field for a fairy in grave once per turn, Hecatrice, who searched for Valhalla, and Valhalla the Hall of the Fallen, which let you special summon a fairy monster from hand if you controlled no monsters. Athena was left behind the moment she was released, not being worth experimenting with as she was slow in the current format, although Hecatrice and Valhalla would be experimented with in the current counter fairy strategies. We would also receive the boss of Konihata Snake deck in Evil Dragon Ananta, who could be summoned by banishing all reptiles in grave, gained 600 attack and defense for each, and destroyed a card on field at the end of every turn. Last, and most importantly, we'd receive Bastion's Mizuki, a zombie that could banish itself from grave to revive another zombie. This card would become integral to later zombie strategies not only as a body, but as an additional piece of extension for the strategy to continue reviving monsters even after most of your revival spells were used up. This, however, was just the warm-up set release, as under a week later, the year starter deck would release, and it would break the useless starter deck streak of the previous years by providing a completely new concept to the game that would change how we played Yu-Gi-Oh! Forever. Starter Deck 5Ds. Release date, August 5th, 2008. Set type, Starter Deck. Major strategies, Synchron. Impact, the soft launch of a new era. The 5D starter deck is considered to be the official start of the 5Ds era of Yu-Gi-Oh! And with it came the first new extra deck mechanic ever to the game, Synchros. On paper, Synchros seem to be effectively a mesh of fusions and rituals, being housed in the extra deck like fusions but taking generic materials like rituals, requiring sending monsters from the field to grave whose total levels equal the new Synchro monster you were wanting to summon, requiring one of those to be the newly designated Tuner monsters, which were enablers for Synchro summoning. In this initial wave, we received the first Tuner monsters, Toon Warrior, Water Spirit, Magna Drago, Frequency Magician, and most importantly, Junk Synchron, who's by far the best of this initial batch thanks to being an instant level 5 Synchro by itself. And the first Synchro monsters, Junk Warrior, Gaia Knight the Force of Earth, and Colossal Fighter. Of these initial monsters, the only one that would be considered a newly coined extra deck staple from this batch was Colossal Fighter, whose Warrior Revive on Destruction effect did not exclude himself, meaning that if it was destroyed in battle, it could revive itself infinitely. In addition to this introduction, reprints here would include Mystic Tomato, Exiled Force, Smashing Ground, and Lightning Vortex, which while most had been effectively phased out due to power creep, were still extremely useful reprints to have. The World Championships would take place 4 days later on August 9th in Berlin, Germany, and it would be a send-off for the GX era in its own way, being one of the last tournaments without synchros present in extra decks, as that major push wouldn't happen for another month. As expected from the previous results, Gladiator Beast would take the majority of the top cut, also taking the World Championship title piloted by Musoka Kazuki of Japan. One of the surprise performances though came from Dimensional Skill Drain Beat, or as it would be colloquially referred to as Macro Drain, being a collection of powerful beaters under Skill Drain paired with Burden of the Mighty, which was a video game promo card from the same set as Dimensional Prison that lowered opponents' monsters' attack by 100 for each of their levels, making it easier to win Skill Drain beatdown trades. SJC Indianapolis would also take place just 1 week later after Worlds on August 16th, and similarly, Gladiator Beast would once again dominate the tournament, winning the event piloted by Robert Ackerman as a last hurrah for the deck before the 5Ds era began in full. Aside from the usual suspects, we would also see one more unique deck top the event, being Hero Beat, building on the success of Macro Drain from the World Championship to use a similar strategy with the high attack values of heroes of Neos Alias and Captain Gold under Skill Drain to take combats effectively. Lastly, before the new era begins, a ban list would be released on September 1st to attempt to bring order to the otherwise Gladiator Beast dominated environment. Newly banned were Demok, a hit to Dad Return being one of the key pieces of the deck, Disc Commander, targeted at a recent surge in popularity alongside Limit Reverse, and Premature Burial, a generic staple that had been a long time coming in many ways, though was curiously not banned with Monster Reborn, which remained legal. Newly limited were Breaker the Magic Warrior, because Konami could not make up their minds about this card for some unearthly reason. Cyber Dragon, down from 2, being a hit to both Machine and the generic staple pool, Dandelion, a preemptive hit to an upcoming Shonen Jump promo, Gorz the Emissary of Darkness, a preemptive hit to an upcoming card from the set Dark Legends, and Monster Gate and Reasoning, hits to various FTKs in the format. Semi-limited were Dark Arm Dragon for obvious reasons, Judgment Dragon to hamper Lightsworn slightly, Phantom of Chaos to prevent getting dad copies, Rescue Cat as a preemptive hit to an upcoming change in Gladiator Beast, Card of Safe Return as it had become a powerful draw tool in many strategies at this point, Chain Strike up from 1 as a boost to Chain Burn, and Nobleman of Crossout up from 1 as a generic boost. Lastly, unlimited were Malicious, Light and Darkness Dragon, Allure of Darkness, Mage Power, Rhoda, and Royal Decree, some of which were in hindsight the worst choices they could have made here. With these changes in place, the 5Ds era would fully take effect with the release of the next core set the following day, and while many things would change in the upcoming meta, so much would stay the same from the previous, as well as get significantly worse in ways no one would have expected. The Duelist Genesis. Release date, September 2nd, 2008. Set type, Core Set. Major strategies, Synchros, Psychics. Impact, New Era, Bigger Problem. The Duelist Genesis was the true start of the 5Ds era in full, bringing the first big wave of playable tuners and synchro monsters to the game, and with it would come a deck that would make itself known rapidly in the format and proceed to dominate through the rest of the year. For the first wave of generic synchros not tied to a specific strategy, we received Stardust Dragon, Red Dragon Archfiend, and Goyo Guardian, all three of which would be available as 10 promos outside of the set too, with Stardust Dragon and Red Dragon Archfiend having already been released a couple of weeks earlier in the first wave of this year's collectible 10s, and Goyo Guardians being later in the month as part of a new 10 set known as the Exclusive 10s, making all three extremely easy to access for the new mechanic. Of these three, Stardust Dragon and Goyo Guardian would be by far the most used, with the former being a level 8 that contributes itself to negate any effect that destroys a card, reviving itself at the end of the turn, and the latter being a level 6 able to steal anything it destroys in battle. In addition to these, we also received the first ever new monster type in the game's history, being the Psychic type, who all seemed to be revolving around paying life points for stronger than average effects. These included Mind Master, a level 1 tuner who could pay 800 and tribute another psychic to summon a level 4 or lower psychic from deck, notably not once per turn. Krebens, a level 2 tuner that can negate any attack that targets it by paying 800 life points. Psychic Commander, a level 3 tuner that can pay up to 500 life points in the damage step when a psychic battles to drain that much attack and defense from the opposing monster. Magical Android, a level 5 synchro that gives the controller back 600 life points for every psychic they control at the end phase. Thought Ruler Archfiend, a level 8 synchro that gains life points when it destroys something in battle and can negate a spell or trap that targets a psychic by paying 1000 life points. And probably the most blatantly overpowered card of the bunch, Emergency Teleport, which special summons a level 3 or lower psychic from deck, banishing it during the end phase. Emergency Teleport, or E-Tele, was by far and away one of the best cards from the entire set, as it made synchro summoning incredibly simple in almost every deck thanks to Mind Master, Krebons, and Psychic Commander all being tuners summonable by the spell, meaning that you had access to a level 1, 2, or 3 tuner on command. This spell would also be a catalyst of sorts for the next Tier 0 mega threat that was about to make itself known, but we'll get to that soon enough. For the TCG exclusives, we received a couple of extremely interesting pieces here aimed at either creating new strategies or strengthening already popular ones, with the beginnings of a Fairy synchro strategy with Herald of Orange Light and Avenging Knight Parshath, support to the previous Six Samurai deck and Hand of the Six Samurai, and probably the most impactful in the short term, Charge of the Light Brigade, a search spell for Lightsworn monsters that milled 3 to search, giving the deck far more consistency moving forward. As for OCG imports, the only one of note here was the Tricky, a level 5 monster that can be special summoned from the hand by discarding a card, which would see occasional play as a combo enabler. Gladiator Beast would receive 2 new incredibly powerful pieces in a quest, who returned a Gladiator Beast card from grave to hand on tagout summon, which could include spells and traps if they included the full archetype name, and War Chariot to pair with it, which was a monster effect negating counter trap as long as you controlled a Gladiator Beast monster, notably able to be recycled with a quest. Book of Eclipse was a board-wide Book of Moon for the turn, notable for being able to stun synchro pushes by flipping a board down temporarily. Lastly, Gear Town was a field spell that let you summon an Ancient Gear monster for 1 less tribute, but that's not what it was used for. Its second effect let you special summon an Ancient Gear monster from the deck when destroyed and sent to the grave, which included the previously released Gachiltron Dragon, meaning you could special summon a 3000 attack body by destroying the field spell. A fun quirk of the game's rules at the time was that by setting a new field spell over a currently active one, the previous one was considered destroyed by this action, meaning that by setting a Gear Town over Gear Town, you could destroy Gear Town manually and summon the Gachiltron Dragon from deck that way, making it a popular option in skill drain related beatdown strategies. SJC Baltimore would be the first event with synchros involved in an impactful way, taking place on September 6th, and while yes, they were impactful, it wasn't necessarily for the reason you'd expect. One new face of the format made itself quite powerfully known right out the gate with this event, being the introduction of the newly coined Teledad, a mixture of the previous Dad Turbo with the new pieces from Duelist Genesis, namely Emergency Teleport and Krebons. Because Krebons was a dark monster, by using him to synchro with either a level 4 or 6 monster like Dark Grepher or Malicious, you could summon out Stardust Dragon or Goyo Guardian and put 2 dark monsters into the grave, making it trivially easy to summon Dad on top of it. Teledad would move from here to be one of the most oppressively overpowered decks in the entire history of the game, being one of the few decks to ever reach the Tier 0 position, which it would achieve over the coming months. However, it wouldn't be the only deck rocking new tools from Duelist Genesis. Gladiator Beast came to play this event by using the new Equest and War Chariot to bolster the already powerful strategy, taking first place piloted by Jermol Jupiter, who notably also included a Krebens in the side deck to potentially use synchro monsters in games 2 and 3. SJC Tulsa would take place 3 weeks later on September 27th, and at that point, Teledad had firmly taken over the format with 11 of the top 16 spots. There were a couple of other notable performances here, like Zombie claiming a top spot using a combination of Mizuki to fuel aggressive plays and Raiko to provide removal and grave setup, as well as Lightsworn having a bit of a resurgence thanks mostly to Charge of the Light Brigade smoothing out their play lines. But neither of these could stop Teledad from taking this event piloted by Adam Korn for his second major event victory after him winning US Nats in 2007. SJC Seattle would be a week later on October 4th and show an even heavier skew in favor of the new format Overlord, taking not only 13 of the top 16 spots, but also the entirety of the top 8, with the winning pilot being Cesar Gonzalez for a second SJC victory. SJC Charlotte took place 2 weeks later on October 18th, and it was clear that nothing was going to stop or change Teledad's performance, claiming 15 of the top 16 spots. Justin Arwin would be the winning pilot to take home first place here, with most builds becoming increasingly centralized as the months progress, seeing the tuner line trimmed to only Krebens, and the inclusion of Snipe Hunter in the list having almost become staple, able to unbrick openings by loading darks from the hand into the grave. We would see a couple of releases left in the year that would attempt to break up the increasingly centralized meta, but at this stage it was clear that the age of Teledad was in full swing, and practically nothing in these upcoming releases was going to stop that. Zombie World. Release date, October 21st, 2008. Set type, Structure Deck. Major strategies, Zombie. Impact, reprints for a Tier 3 strategy. The Zombie World Structure Deck was meant as a sort of precursor to what was about to release in the next core set by placing a heavy emphasis on stealing an opponent's monsters destroyed by battle if they're zombies, being a pseudo-type mechanic like how Psychics did with the life point costs. This was present in both Red-Eye Zombie Dragon and Paladin of the Cursed Dragon, two new monsters from this structure deck able to steal a zombie either that they destroyed in battle in Zombie Dragon's case, or in the grave because it was destroyed by battle in Paladin's case. This was all enabled by the new field spell Zombie World, which made all monsters on both players' field and graves zombies, and prevented tribute summoning non-zombie type monsters, with the latter effect allowing the card to see side deck play against Monarch strategies. The structure deck also provided reprints of Pyramid Turtle, Spirit Reaper, Zombie Master, Cold Wave, Magical Stone Excavation, Card of Safe Return, Book of Life, Terraforming, Pot of Avarice, Soul Taker, Card Destruction, and Bottomless Trap Hole, with some being great generic staple reprints and the others being great zombie strategy reprints. In addition to this, the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX manga Volume 2 released on November 4th, and with it came Thunder King Ryo, a monster that locked adding cards from deck to hand outside of drawing while on the field, and could be tributed to negate the inherent special summon of a monster, being an almost instant staple in stun strategies. This could be seen at SJC Chicago just under 2 weeks later on November 15th, where Teledad would still be the dominant force in the meta, but Hero Beat would squeeze into the top 16 playing the newly released Ryo, now placing more focus on the light attribute with Freed the Brave Warrior and Honest. A new variant of Lightsworn would also crack into the top 8 here, being Twilight, which combined the normal Lightsworn strategy with a teched-in copy of Dark Arm Dragon and Phantom of Chaos, able to provide the dad push as well as Phantom able to copy milled copies of Judgment Dragon for the board wipe effect. Ryan Spicer would take the event piloting Teledad, as to be expected in the format, seeing little to no change in the deck lineup since its last outing. That standard lineup was about to change, however, as the next core set was just around the corner and would bring new tools to attempt to shake up the meta, but would only make the already present issues worse. Crossroads of Chaos. Release date, November 18th, 2008. Set type, Core Set. Major strategies, Plants, Zombies, Morphtronic. Impact, the Menace grows stronger. Crossroads of Chaos would be the final core set of 2008, and it would continue the push of new generic synchro tools to work with thanks to its headlining card, Black Rose Dragon. A level 7 synchro that has the ability to banish a plant from grave to change a monster from defense to attack mode and its attack to 0. Oh yeah, and on Synchro Summon it can nuke the board. This card alone would immediately shift deck list compositions, as with the previous pool, once people had refined lists, they had cut Psychic Commander from most E-Telly lists because the level 7 pool was not really worth the investment. But now E-Telly plus any level 4 monster could result in a full board wipe. Black Rose Dragon would become a staple of extra decks moving forward, boosted by the second wave of the collectible tins also providing an easy access copy of it alongside Turbo Warrior, who no one asked for. This was meant to be paired with the new plant support like Nettles, a level 2 plant tuner, Titanial, Princess of Camellias, a boss monster who could tribute any plant you control to negate a card that targets, and Miracle Fertilizer, a once per turn monster reborn for plants at the cost of your normal summon and is destroyed once a monster it summons leaves the field. While a solo plant deck would not take off from this, Titanial would see experimentation as a splash option for some decks thanks to the previously released TCG exclusive Lone Fire Blossom, who could tribute itself to summon Titanial straight from the deck, which would become a popular option over the course of the era once the elephant in the room was eventually dealt with. Zombies receive further support here in the form of their new synchros Doomkaiser Dragon and Revive King Hades, with the former able to steal a zombie from the opponent's grave and summon it on Synchro Summon, and the latter able to negate the effects of anything destroyed in battle by a zombie monster permanently. Both of these were locked to only being able to be summoned by the tuner Plague Spreader Zombie, a level 2 zombie tuner that could revive itself by stacking a card from hand on top of the deck, but was banished after it left the field if it used this effect. Plague Spreader was almost instantly picked up, not for zombies, but as a dark monster that enabled synchro plays and could remove itself from the grave to manipulate your dark monster count. That's right, it's Teledad support. It also helped that Plague Spreader was without question the best standalone tuner we had at this stage, as it would see play throughout the rest of the era thanks to its versatility. Morphtronic as an archetype would be introduced here, a series of machines that gained different effects based on whether they were in attack or defense mode. With Selphon able to summon a Morphtronic from the top cards of your deck based on a die roll while in attack mode, Boomboxen able to attack twice while in attack mode, Radion boosting Morphtronic monsters attack while in attack mode and defense while in defense mode, and Accelerator able to return a Morphtronic in hand to deck to pop a card on the field and draw a card. While Morphtronic would not be meta, the occasional pop-up would happen for an OTK strategy surrounding Boomboxen and Radion, able to boost Boomboxen to ridiculous attack totals thanks to limiter removal and other cards. The Iron Chain archetype would be introduced here, being a series of monsters aimed at milling and burning the opponent, with the only useful piece here being Iron Chain Dragon, a generic level 6 synchro that mills the opponent for 3 on battle damage. Whitestone of Legend would be a level 1 dragon tuner able to search a Blue Eyes White Dragon when sent to grave, being a useful tool for Exodia related strategies by providing a search for a trade-in target when discarded. Spellcaster strategies received a couple of new interesting pieces in Secret Village of Spellcasters, a field spell that locked the opponent from using spells if you controlled the spellcaster and locked yourself if you didn't, as well as the TCG exclusives Night End Sorcerer, a level 2 tuner who banished up to 2 cards from the opponent's grave on special summon, and Tempest Magician, who gained a spell counter on summon, could discard spells to stack more onto monsters you controlled, and could remove all spell counters from the board to burn the opponent for 500 for each, becoming a build around for FTK strategies. Gozen Match was seen as a bit of a counterpart to Rivalry of Warlords, locking both players to only one attribute, seeing a lot of usage in stun strategies of the time and in side decks. Lastly are the 2 remaining TCG exclusives worth talking about, being Gladiator Beast Rediari, who banished a card in the opponent's grave on its tagout summon, and Treacherous Trap Hole, which destroyed 2 monsters on the field if you had no traps in grave. This release would lead into the last set of the year 3 days later, and any hope of changing the format would have to rest on its one new card. And while it would change many aspects of the game, the meta would not be one of them. Dark Legends. Release date, November 21st, 2008. Set type, reprint set. Major strategies, promos and hard to get cards. Impact, a new menace to the battle phase. Dark Legends was entirely sold as a reprint set, primarily reprinting cards from the first 3 sets of the game, where most of the good cards among them were once again banned, but had an interesting kicker of the set being a reprint of previously harder to get promos or one-off cards that were in one set before this. These included reprints of cards like Green Baboon, Scapegoat, Dark Bribe, Card Trooper, Destiny Hero Malicious, Destiny Draw, Meltiel Sage of the Sky, Nova Summoner, and Galenduo. However, there was one brand new card also included in the set, and he was without question the biggest impact. This particular set was exclusively sold at Walmart at the time in blister packs of 2 with a promo included in each, and that promo was Gorz the Emissary of Darkness, who could, when you take battle damage with nothing on the field, summon itself and trigger an additional effect based on what kind of damage it was, being burning the opponent for the same amount in the case of effect damage, or summoning a token with stats equal to the damage taken in the case of battle damage. The battle damage effect made Gorz an absolute staple to the meta, seeing a play in absolutely every deck of the era with very little exception, as now attacking into a completely clear board caused a significant mind game on whether the opponent had Gorz or not. It also caused a change in player behavior that would stick around for many years after the fact, where players, when attacking directly, would now attack with their monsters in the order of lowest to highest attack value as to not be countered by the Gorz token. One of the few cases in the history of the game where player behavior was changed by a single card. SJC Atlanta would be on the next day on November 22nd, and as a note, though Gores was released at this point, he was not easy to receive prior to this event due to the tendency of Walmart's not stocking Yu-Gi-Oh product on the day of release, making a Walmart exclusive promo incredibly difficult to find on release day. As for meta shifts, the only new deck we'd see in the top cut here from the Crossroads release was Zombie Teledad, which was a variant of Teledad using Zombie package to help manipulate graveyard counts and provide draw power with Card of Safe Return, seeing Plague Spreader Zombie instantly finding success. Jerry Wang would win the event with the standard Teledad, being his second SJC victory this year, seeing minimal change to the standard deck list outside of the introduction of a single copy of Plague Spreader Zombie. This was followed by the last event of the year, being SJC Detroit on December 6th, and barring a surprise top from Gadget, the meta was mostly what we'd expected at this stage, seeing Gore slotted into many of the decks ending in the top 16. Stephen Harris would take his second SJC title this year with Teledad, playing not only Gores, but also a single copy of Psychic Commander to access Black Rose Dragon with any level 4, and Tempest Magician with a single copy of Breaker the Magical Warrior. This would conclude the events of 2008 in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame, but a significant change was on the horizon for the game as a whole. Up until this point in history, the TCG side of Yu-Gi-Oh! Had been entirely managed by Upper Deck, as they had purchased the distribution rights for the game prior to its overseas release. In October of 2008, a lawsuit was filed by Konami in the state of California against the company Vintage Sports Cards Incorporated, alleging the company was distributing packages containing counterfeit rare Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. Konami was granted an injunction against VSC in this process, but during the discovery process they found evidence that alleged the counterfeit cards VSC was distributing were provided to them by Upper Deck Entertainment, the distributor of Yu-Gi-Oh! For the TCG. This discovery would begin a months-long endeavor between Konami and Upper Deck, resulting in the complete removal of Upper Deck from all TCG-related products and activities, having Konami fully seize control of the game from that point forward. This is an important point to realize going into 2009, as from roughly this point forward, Upper Deck and their version of the TCG would slowly fade into obscurity as Konami took over and would be making any and all decisions for the state of the game moving forward, for better and for worse. It was still to be determined how this would affect the game moving forward, but regardless, moving into 2009 with the reign of Teledad still in full swing, it was only a matter of time before some kind of change would finally come along and kill the beast. A huge shout out to my Dark Law level patrons, Jukes, Otaku GamerX, Prinrin, and Ryza339, as well as all of my other patrons over on patreon.com. If you want to help support the channel and see my videos a day early, consider supporting me on Patreon, where support tiers start at just $1 a month. If you enjoyed what you saw here today, consider subscribing to the channel. We're actually getting really close to 20,000 subscribers, so any little bit helps. So be sure to pound that subscribe button. Thank you all again, and I'll see you next time.